morning, everyone. We're calling to order the Eastham Zoning Task Force. This meeting will be video recorded and broadcast over local access channel 8 and through the town website at www.eastham-ma.gov. Thank you. We have one member with us, Martin, joining us remotely, and we have 3 other members here. So we do have a quorum for well, 3.
I'm a guest.
Oh, that's right.
We have a guest. I'll explain that a little bit. So we have a quorum, so we can proceed. And as we discussed, one of our other members, Kevin, is hopefully eating a lot of pasta in Italy and having a he was like 3 weeks in Italy.
Lucky dog.
I know. So
I'm sure he's studying zoning while he's there.
yeah. Well, I volunteered to debrief him when he comes back. So and I'm gonna
Over pasta.
over pasta, hopefully. So anyways, we're all set to go. I will just say, Tom McNillis is with us again. The intention of the select board was to take up his nomination last night. And it has been favorably received, although we still technically need a vote. However, there was a little administrative glitch. We apparently are the one committee that the select board has retained appointing authority. We do not go through the search committee. We had this, we had to clarify that with the search committee last year. This was from the inception of this committee,
Right.
that they set this up. Last week when Tom's nomination came up, the town clerk was not quite aware of that status, and she didn't put it on the agenda so that it would be referred to the search committee. Paul has clarified that, so we have a little glitch. It's going to be resolved next week. So I think we're in business. So that's just a little bit there.
Yes,
I think
it's all good.
that's all good. Okay. So, Pat had some, Pat has a cool part-time job in the summer, which interfered with her ability to get here for the last couple meetings, although she's always diligent about following up and reading everything. But she is now officially taking over for Carolyn, taking our minutes as the secretary of this this group.
So happy.
And I'm thanking Carolyn for her 4 years of minute taking. It was tremendously appreciated. It kind of kept me a little on track. So with that, can we take a minute to approve the minutes?
I move that we approve the minutes of September 23rd as distributed.
Second. Any questions? No? Okay, do I hear a motion? Aye.
All in favor, aye.
I approve that.
Oh, thank you, Martin. Okay, great. All right, we'll go to discussion site coverage neighborhood averages. We had hoped she had a conflict that the assessor would be here so that we could start looking at detail in terms of mapping and the capacity of the town assessor in the records to help us sort and analyze neighborhood averages when we're trying to come up with a neighborhood characteristic. I'm going to let Paul explain why that has been difficult. We've gone down this road a couple times. When we did the development limits, we kicked around putting quantitative measurements on neighborhood character. We ran out of time. We couldn't get that done. It has continued to be a problem simply, but we can elaborate that without really definitive boundaries, the planning board has had reluctance to sort of shape things in the way that the intent maybe of the bylaw was supposed to happen. But so we're here to talk about how we might infuse into the bylaw an objective standard which would put the planning board on a better sort of clarify their role and sort of help in terms of disputes when there's debates with lawyers about what can and cannot happen. So there's some ambiguity there, and we can talk about, there's some recent projects that really raise this as well for me. So with that, I want to turn to Paul both in terms of maybe just a recap for folks about historically what has been the issue, and maybe we should have a policy discussion, even though we won't have the assessor here to talk about how data can be crunched, et cetera. I mentioned to Paul a thought, so we're gonna have some conversation about the broader policy of how we might approach this subject. With that, I see the microphone. Paul, you can stop.
Okay, so the difficulty, even with the new language that we've had on the books at the planning board, and I know Kevin has expressed this also, and Pat, you've seen this too. As much as we try to make it less subjective with the new language, it's still difficult. And especially when we have projects that someone's looking to expand their house in a neighborhood where that's the first project in, so it's a neighborhood of small ranches or cottages, and somebody wants to kind of, redo change the nature of their property. It's the first one in. So that's where it's important, because that kind of sets the tone for the rest of the neighborhood. So even with some of the guardrails we try to put on it, I think this becomes difficult. So this idea of like, can we reduce the subjectivity more by introducing some data into it, where the staff could run an analysis, get an average site coverage for the neighborhood, and then use that as a benchmark to say, okay, well, here's what the average is, here's what the proposal is, and I should back up, because we're always going to be in this situation with the board, with these projects, where the project comes in under the site coverage limit, because you have to be under that maximum limit. But, they're still trying to expand the house, and you're in this in-between area, and then the board's wrestling with, well, how big is too big when you're still under the max limit? Right. So that's calibrating, like, what is the appropriate, and then that gets back to the character of the neighborhood, which again is probably the most difficult thing to wrestle with, the most objective thing. So the idea was, can we use the assessing data to run an analysis to get the average site coverage of the neighborhood within the 300-foot radius that we've established? And then can we figure out, is there a percentage within that would be appropriate? So you can expect, you have to be under the max, and then based on the neighborhood average, you can go 10%, whatever it is, 5, 10, 15, whatever it is, percent above what the neighborhood average is. Again, just to try to like calibrate, because the first house in the scenario, and we went through it, this was before the bylaw was in effect, but the project I always refer to is on Quamashad Road. There was a house that was significant. It would have been under the max, but if the bylaw had been in place, but it's still significantly bigger in a completely different architectural style, and it's totally different than the rest of the neighborhood. And then it was just tough to wrestle with. That sets the tone for the rest of it, because so even though it's under the max, the next person that comes in with their project is going to look to that one and say, well, you proved that I'm under the max, but I'm right at the max or just under, and then over time, that's the neighborhood, rather than preserving it as closer to what it is, which is what the goal was, that certain neighborhoods should be preserved. And this is tough for everyone to work around, for the board members, it's tough for myself even, because it's like the way the intent is really certain neighborhoods should stay small scale, modest houses. But we're trying to allow people to, exercise their property rights to, improve their properties and expand and do all these things. That's kind of tough.
Well, and I think if we can reach a point where we are in the zoning specific, whatever that specific is, that's quantifiable, it also puts prospective homeowners on notice as they go to buy a piece of property, that this is what the rules are. If you're gonna play by the rules, this is what the rules are. And so, because I think sometimes what happens is right now, because it's kind of squishy, people buy a piece of property thinking, well, it's squishy, so I can do what I want. And they have an expectation when they buy the property, what they're going to do, as opposed to knowing definitively what they can and can't do. So I think that the other advantage of having something more quantitative, it sets a signal to the prospective buyers as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, you know, the issue with these, using the data really gets to the size, you know, the actual size and the scale and the mass of the project. Not necessarily the architecture, which is another issue that's tough to wrestle with, because again, I think fundamentally, it's hard for people to process that. A goal of the town through the strategic plan and through what we put in zoning is, again, like I said, just that certain neighborhoods should not, over time, become gentrified into, you know, McMansions with all of this, you know, higher end, fancier architecture. Some neighborhoods are supposed to stay modest structures. And then, but then in between that, how do you wrestle with somebody who doesn't want to live in their ranch house anymore? They want something else, you know, they want to add a second floor to all this. So rest, and that's really where all this comes down to. Site plan review is shaping the project and trying to wrestle with this stuff. And it's not. So I was just saying, so without having everything so tightly controlled that you're in a box, it's tough, because every project, the nature of site plan review is to shape the project and wrestle with it and twist and turn it and get it. And that's a lot of work. I mean, that's the job of the planning board. So getting people to understand the policy perspective of this, so it's embedded into, we're trying to protect and preserve certain characteristics of the neighborhood, but then you got to wrestle with what people want to do individually with their houses. I guess from my perspective, that's been the biggest thing that I think the board as a whole has had difficulty with, is because, you know, you got to tell people that there's certain neighborhoods where a larger gambrel style roof with a big, huge porch and a matching gambrel style detached barn is just not what that neighborhood is. And you gotta refine it doesn't mean that you can't have a bigger, you know, expand and have a different house. You don't have to have a ranch house, but like, what's the neighborhood? There's looking to the neighborhood, like it's a mix, and maybe it's gonna be a more traditional Cape style roof, and maybe it's a fancy bow roof Cape style. I mean, it's the thing, it's like finding a way. Doesn't mean everyone has to be in a boring square box of a house, you know, because, but that's just been very difficult. So anyways, the data piece was really trying to give a metric to say, okay, get some guardrails around, like at least control the size, the massing, and from that, like get at these other issues. But the assessing data is not necessarily set up to do that. You know, it's not meant to do that, but that's the data that we have to work with. So I had forgotten this until recently, but I think last year I asked the software folks to create an app for me to calculate this. So that app works. So you can basically, you pick an address. It goes through our mapping and ties to the assessing data, and it'll come up, it'll calculate the neighborhood average. It'll give you within the 300-foot radius. But what we don't know exactly is what is it grabbing in the assessing data? So is it accounting for detached buildings within that whole group? Is it calculating whether, you know,
Just putting like a freestanding garage.
yes,
Sure.
because the assessing data it's all broken out differently into different, I mean, this is like a software issue, but it's like behind the scenes, it's different pieces of the property are broken out into different columns of data. It's not all consolidated like that. So it's really a technical question. If we wanted to insert this piece into the bylaw, we can, and just figuring out what the right percentage of calibrated, but then it's just really the software piece to make sure like the data can be aggregated so that we can get close to apples. So right now, in the assessing data, it's hard to pick out, like, if there's a detached garage with a finished room above. In the app that I had built, I don't know if it's getting the area of the finished space above the garage or not, or if it's a finished basement or not. So that's the part we kind of gotta figure out. Can this be behind the scenes? Can it be aggregated into a way that we understand what isn't being included in the data? Because when the project comes before the planning board, it's much more detailed. I mean, they have the floor plans, they have everything broken out, so we know exactly what is, finished floor above the garage, yes, no, all these things. But when we run the report, you're getting an average, and I think the weak point in that for the board is the applicant's gonna say, well, I know exactly what I'm calculating here, and I am trying to get a detached barn with a finished space. And you're comparing it to a neighborhood average where we don't know what's in there. And if there is a bunch of detached barns with finished space above and you're not putting that in your average, then we're not comparing apples to apples. So that's what, in my mind, I think it's important to try to understand that. There's a policy decision that can be made. It's like the data is never going to be able to be used that way. And we say we acknowledge that, but we're going to move forward with what the data can do, and that's fine. Or do we want to? We're not comfortable with that. So I guess that's the policy piece. The data piece can be.
I did.
Sorry, I'm sorry, Martin.
Oh, no. I was just trying to say, I had a couple of quick questions. Paul, you mentioned the first project on Oquamashad. How, that's not a very big street. How big a lot was that? Do you recall?
I don't recall. I mean, it was maybe 20,000 something. I'd have to look up. It wasn't a tiny lot. It was pretty substantial lot, and it had a 3-bedroom Cape house with a farmer's porch on. I mean, that was probably the biggest house. It already was different from the majority of houses on there. So that was where, and I remember having this discussion. We got into it quite detailed with the board, but it was discussion of like what they were trying to build was so out of sync with the rest of the neighborhood that you already had a Cape style. You could embellish that and make it fancier and a little bit bigger and all that stuff. But we don't have architectural review traditional sense like some towns do. So we get into this squishy zone where it's like we're supposed to look at this stuff, but we don't have architectural review where it's more directive, like. So
was it ultimately approved?
it was.
Because
I mean,
we didn't have objective requirements to
Yeah, I
follow.
mean, this was before all the bylaw anyways, but there was some tweaking of it, but it's still, when you go down there, you can, I haven't gone down there for a while, so I don't know.
What street is
So
it?
Paul, just to finish it, the follow-up there was, so you mentioned how you're not sure how to count, outbuildings that have finished space in them. But how are we going to account for a cottage community? So if I have a cottage community in my neighborhood with 5 or 6, small 800 square foot cottages, are we going to compare that to year-round homes that are on the other side of the street?
No, we put a special provision in for cottage colonies. There's only 14 of them, but do you want to?
Well, I think you're looking at the more established cottage. There's fear. Well, what about ADUs and other people that have one? There's lots of people that have, a secondary cottage on their lot. They're not an official cottage community like the 14 that we have listed.
Yeah, so I think the assessors have that, they're accounting for that space in the data. We just don't know.
Right. I guess part of my argument is if there's, because we live in a community that has 70% of the houses are unoccupied in the winter, but of those, there's a fair amount of them that are really just cottages. They're not winterized. And my point is, I'm not sure as a homeowner, I want to be compared to a series of non-winterized cottages, whether they're a quote unquote cottage community or just a unwinterized beach shack. And having that count towards what the neighborhood average is, aesthetically, yes, that's the average, but it's not. You're asking someone who lives here full time and might be a firefighter who's trying to add 2 bedrooms to his house for his kids or something. That's, that to me, we need clarity as to exactly what type of comparisons we're making.
Can I just say a few things, clarifying things? I just make some points here. I just want to remind people, one of the phenomena that's going on is we haven't communicated all the zoning changes in a mass. And I made a pitch to the select board who tentatively have agreement that after this town meeting, we need to do a mailer to every property owner about all of the changes that have been made. And Jamie Dimitri was very strong about, and we also need to get that to the builders and the real estate, because the real estate agents are not telling prospective buyers about changes. So that's one thing there. I just want, when we tackled this issue 2 or 3 years ago.
But excuse me, just to clarify what you just said, are you saying that we wait to do that until next June?
Yeah. When we have whatever this round is.
Okay,
So we've passed 20. And again, this was a flyer, which basically, what we've talked about, and nothing's been done,
right.
which is to give a one-liner about the changes that have been made, why it's been made, and here's a link to read it. But everybody can kind of be aware of that, and then everyone's been on notice. So that's just a technical detail. I think the other thing I just want us to remind us, when we tackled this issue last time, the feedback we got from the planning board is, how do you define neighborhood? We actually defined neighborhood and got town meeting to plan that neighborhood is the average of a 300-foot circumference. So we've already put a definition in there. Now, Paul raises questions about outbuildings and in-buildings, and, I've pushed back at him and said, are we overcomplicating this? We've been given a bunch of model bylaws from the commission, which I don't know if you noticed, but they actually define primary structure here as primary attached. And when they do in these documents here, they are saying you don't consider all someone's got a shed, or someone's got this, or someone's got that. So I'm just saying, and when Sarah comes, we can maybe ask them about why they did that. I do think, there is an administrative factor of how you calculate it, but we visited this a bunch of times. And the last point I would make is, when we did development limits, knowing that we would be constraining some folks, 529 of them out of the 5,964, those numbers are in my head, that we were really constraining them. We then took the action of saying, we're going to exclude basements. So on average, people have got another 1,000+ square feet to sort of play with. We're going to exclude your 200-foot shed in the back. So now if you're growing, you have, you can think through, creatively with architects, how to reuse a basement and, still. So that was the mitigation we did. We defined neighborhood, or tried to, and then we put that mitigation in.
How was the 300-foot radius established? I guess that you've got a good definition now, but what does that really mean? Is it any lot that touches within that 300 square foot radius, or the entire lot is within the 300?
You just draw a circle, and what
right, but if you have
falls
a
in.
corner of a lot that bisects that 300
Yes,
foot,
that's.
Yeah.
is that included?
Yeah,
Okay.
it really comes from the legal notification for parties of an interest for regulatory hearings. It's a butter. It's a butters to a butters parcels sharing common lot lines and directly across the street. In reality, what we do, because that's how we send out the abutters notices.
Okay.
The mapping software basically does a 300-foot radius.
Okay.
And so it's any lot that touches that.
Okay.
And then there's also, so that's where that 300-foot radius came from, just to kind of embed it in something that was already established as like, all of these people are already, from a legal standpoint, a party in interest, so we took it from there. There's also language in the bylaw that we added that allows the board to consider what's it called? properties within subdivisions that are beyond the 300. Or if directly across a body of water where you might be visually impacted, but it's beyond the 300 foot. So the example of the subdivision is that, like on a case by case basis, the board could consider. Because the house in question, the project in question may be at the beginning of the subdivision, and somebody lives at the very end. They're not within 300 feet, but they drive by this thing every day. It's, it may affect their access to and from it. So we add a little bit of language to give some latitude to the board to consider. If you're across the pond, you still got a site issue, visual issue maybe, so there's some little bit of latitude the board can consider special circumstances.
And I want to, I guess this is more of the imperative. When I saw the Shirtlift property up in the Provincetown Independent this week, and I was sort of reacting a bit to quotes from our planning chair, I sort of went back and I looked at the intent language when we put in the development limits, which certainly articulated an intent about neighborhood characteristics, et cetera. But then I also found, and we don't have to go over this right now, but if you review page 104 and to 106 in the bylaws, in 2001, criteria was listed for site plan review. And it is, the frustration I have is some of the more egregious projects that have gone past because we don't have language to help us do this is contrary to everything that they adopted in 2001. I mean, the language is here. And so I guess the issue is, we've gone back and forth on this for 5 years. Do we have legal language problems, or do we have just a difficulty with the volunteer planning board, who are hesitant, especially in the face of an opposing attorney telling them all the legal rights their clients have, and nobody's a lawyer, and whatever. So we just sort of have to confront the reality. I mean, I'm looking at this language and I'm saying, we don't even need changes if this was adhered to. Because everything that we found onerous is listed as a criteria that you should be accounting for. So I think that's the basic issue. Is it just that, volunteer, I mean, he's not on the planning board any longer, and and I'm not going to mention names, but I mean, I had a heated conversation with someone 4 years ago when we started down this road. And he said, I live in a small town. He's like, get me outside the post office. I'm not going to tell someone what he can do with their property and then run into him at the coffee shop. That's not happening. So if that's the reality, I'm kind of like, if that's the human dynamic reality we have here, then the answer is maybe, like development limits, there just has to be really hard limits of whatever those limits are. We have to define them in some way, because
Mary, we do
Yeah.
have a hard limit. I mean, we put a hard limit in 2 years ago on the development size. I
That
know
was
it's very
supposed to-
high.
No, but it was supposed to be, the intent of that and the language we wrote, it was supposed to be a dual limit. The site limits were the maximum, and then equal, I mean, the language says equally, it says here, all these standards need to be, the site limits are just one criteria for consideration. The
What do you
standards will be, I'm reading from page, from the development limits that we wrote, page 83. It's in the purpose. Distinctive characteristic, compatible with development practices in the existing neighborhood, consistent with the strategic plan goals. And the development limits are intended to be one criteria for consideration, just one. Standards will be evaluated in conjunction with established prevailing characteristics of the neighborhood that is defined. So that's where we couldn't put a number in here because we ran out of time to do the analysis. but we tried to write the language strong enough that this was never just, you get the max. The max is what you can't exceed, and then we evaluate based on your impact in the community. And if you go to the 104 and 105, I mean, I was losing my mind last night reading this, because almost all the rationale for why the planning board couldn't shape shirt lift was actually in contrary to the criteria, which was been established since 2001. So, it is what it, I mean, that's just the reality we're dealing with. You can,
I think you're right, all this language is in the bylaw, it has been. And probably a more systematic way of doing site plan review is needed. Part of that can be through the staff report, and part of it just has to be the nature of how the process that the board uses amongst its own members, about how you go through and evaluate more closely all this criteria. So I think there's that part of it.
no, I know.
I think shirtlift is an interesting situation because that
The recent-
part of shirtlift road,
The recent shirt lift.
yeah, and the one that's in the paper that got approved by the board.
Yeah.
That little node of shirtlift, the house that got approved is pretty much in line with what's going on in shirtlift.
On the whole road, yeah.
Yeah.
Right, there are
They're
a
not
few
300
things
foot
on that
radius.
road, yeah, but not a 300-foot radius, but the immediate neighborhood, that's, I mean, Shirtlift Road was one of the reasons why this bylaw, these changes got passed, I mean,
In the first place.
but that part of that road was already like that, so we've lost, so
We've
that
lost that.
house, and that was part of the rationale of the planning board's approval was, yes, it's a big house and it has all these features, but that's what is in the immediate area. And the house, the detached house that got taken down was, I mean, that's getting removed from part of the view shed of the neighbors. Now, some of the neighbors raised this issue, but there wasn't anybody that came to that hearing and said concretely, like, there's going to be a house directly in my view, like that. There was some commentary and some issues about that, but that was nothing that was presented concretely to the board. Like, if you approve this house the way it is, like, my view is completely obliterated. So that again goes back to the subjectivity of it and trying to account for, like, and I will tell you, the view situation is very subjective. I mean, it's 180-degree view across the whole thing, or all year long round you have it, or, I mean, I've had people over the years talk about, I can see the ocean in the winter at certain times of the years when the leaves are off of the trees and all this kind of stuff. I mean, it's very
Right.
subjective. So I'm just saying, it's, I think there is a more systematic way we could do site plan review, but we're never gonna get totally away from some of these issues. It's
So
Mine-
yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So I agree when we talk about Shortcliffe and several of the other roads, Bayberry is another one that go by the bay, that are on the bay. The town has seen those lots get overdeveloped, and there's no doubt that anybody drives down, they see that the views have been cut back. And when we're trying to define the problem that we're addressing here, and Paul just mentioned that this is, one of the best examples of what's happened on Shortcliffe. But the problem there was that those buildings were allowed to get redeveloped because they were able to account for their entire lot, not just the upland and the part of their lot that's underwater. Now, the town addressed that last year so that the people that are, on the water can no longer build a 4-bedroom house, even though they only have a 1/4 acre of dry land. So that's the real reason why that got, I think we've addressed that issue. And that house, like Paul said, is fits with the rest of the neighborhood as it gets developed. I forget what the address is, the most recent one.
Well, it's right in the corner.
I know. I was looking at the address, 425 or something like that.
Let's not just focus on that, because I think we all see Shirtlift and we know what it looks like. But step back, sort of off the bay, and those small neighborhoods where we have had, people who want to expand, and we have seen the neighbors come in and say, this is not how we see our neighborhood. But there was nothing for us to look at that quantified. So I think we should look at sort of the whole town, not just, because we can get like over-focused on Shirtliff.
Yeah.
And if someone had come in and said, this is gonna screw up my view, I don't think the planning board would have had any way to address that. It would be too bad. But we have a whole town with smaller buildings that are now looking at being a little bit overshadowed by these behemoths that don't seem to fit in. And I think one of the things that maybe will help us, but not help us technically, that's the software issue, but help us sort of philosophically is when we look at the strategic plan and see what the select board and the people on the strategic planning committee have said their vision for the town is.
Yeah, that's,
Martin and then Carolyn. Martin, just follow up.
We mentioned about, there's people that have bought these lots as part of their plan to retire. You know, I know somebody who has a 1 acre lot in near Oquamashad that has a cottage and an outbuilding on it. And his plan is to rebuild that site, you know, and build a family home on it. Now, he bought that 5 or 6 years ago. So if his development rights for his property are being dramatically changed, are people like him then going to seek tax abatements because the land is no longer worth what we said it was worth? Or are we just going to apply these rules going forward to new people that purchase? Because everyone wants to think that, you know, this is some hedge fund from New York buying these properties and redeveloping them. But in reality, these are people that live here now that have bought these lots. As I walk and ride my bike through almost every corner of this town, and when I see the lots getting developed, a lot of these lots are getting developed, you know, not the trophy houses, but a lot of these houses that are really getting developed are the few places where we see families, where we see cars. You see, you know, 3 or 4 or 5 cars in the driveway where you know they have kids in high school and so forth. So I'm just wary of, you know, I'm happy of putting restrictions on stuff, and in fact, I think the 6,000 foot restriction was on the high side, but I just think that we're opening up. It depends on how this happens and what types of restrictions we put on it. But I know at least one person that is going to be impacted pretty heavily by this. So.
Well, I mean, any of the 20 changes we've made in the last 5 years, Martin, have impacted. And we've asked you know, it depends if you ask philosophically or legally. I mean, you can change zoning.
I know that. Yeah, you can
How
change
we
it. Yeah.
would get into ever figuring out who bought 5 years ago with a different assumption. I mean, I was really struck, and I think he was making a very honest comment. You know, when discussing how we got into some of these quandaries with planning, Bob Bruns at the select board meeting last week said, you know, we have a problem in terms of when I bought my home and the realtor was saying why I should buy my home. He said, this is Eastham. They let you do anything. I mean, that was his statement at the select board. And, you know, so I think I almost feel like there's been a culture of sort of laissez-faire that had brought us to a problem. I don't think we're trying to stop development. It was sort of, how do you have managed growth that keeps the neighborhood somewhat consistent? And, you know, someone can, you know, you can get bedrooms and I mean, I think you can do creative architect. I don't think we're stopping anyone from finding a great home. It's just a matter of how excessive is it in terms of changing that neighborhood. Carolyn?
Pat, to your point about the strategic plan, the way the strategic plan is designed, if you will, is to really reflect the other adopted plans of the town. So the strategic plan doesn't say anything at a level of specificity that you're talking about neighborhoods and what neighborhoods are going to look like. It refers to the zoning. And it says the zoning defines what we want to do, and it refers to the work of this committee that's a task force that's going forward to continue to evolve that. But if you look at it, it does the same thing with housing. It doesn't talk about specific goals for housing or requirements for housing. It talks about the housing production plan. It doesn't talk about climate action and all of that. It refers to the report that's forthcoming about the climate action report. I think that title,
Right.
but yeah. So it really relies on the sub-plans, if you will, that the town is adopting, the open space plan, so forth. So I just want to clarify that to understand that there's nothing in the strategic plan itself that lays out the goals and principles. It relies on what we've put in the goals in terms of the zoning, and the things that we said are the goals and the purpose of the zoning.
Tom?
So that's an interesting question, and the housing production plan doesn't really talk about this, and I'm wondering, is what we're trying to do here, how do we make it consistent with the housing production plan? And specifically, if someone wanted to put an ADU in place or do a multifamily conversion and expand a little bit, are we going against the intent of that housing production plan?
And I know the answer to that too, because I'm on the
Okay.
Fourth Housing Committee, and the answer to that is no, the housing production plan does not talk about neighborhoods and characteristics and size. It's more talking about the kinds of housing we need and the dearth of housing that we're experiencing, what's changing as we go from a lot of full-time rentals to virtually no full-time rentals. It talks about it at that higher level, but more quantitatively about the difference between what we have and what we need. And not making specific judgments about the type of
Right.
housing.
But if someone wanted to have had a lot that was suitable for an ADU, for instance, does this perhaps squash that in some instances because you're expanding your site coverage at that point by putting an ADU in place?
Well, we could maybe.
No. Yeah, short answer to that.
Yeah,
Okay.
we will have that.
The short answer. is no.
I think the one thing though,
I don't understand why we don't agree with Tom's point about that an ADU would impact the ability to build an ADU. Why wouldn't, is that going to be excluded from this?
no, well, the new state law, which has by right, because we've agreed to be a seasonal community, we may be forced to do certain things in zoning, and we don't know what those things are yet because they haven't specified the regulations. So it's not that I don't care about ADUs, it's just that there's legal ambiguity. They've made it by right, and they've specified a lot of detail, which takes a little bit out of local, I mean, we're going to just have to make an adjustment. We don't know exactly what the adjustment would be.
It's on our work plan to
Yeah,
do this year.
but I just want to respond to this conversation between Carolyn and Pat about the intersection of the plans. And Tom, so from the beginning, the housing production plan, both the 2019 and the 2022 update, highlighted the fact that we've lost between 300 and 400 year-round rental properties. And so whenever you've seen the amendments that we have made, we have viewed the work of this committee as how are we going to increase year-round rental homes? So whether we did top of the shop in the DCPC, which has to be rental, workforce housing, hotel motel conversions, we have embedded in every one of these zoning changes when we've given flexibility to say, you can't do short-term rentals, you can do workforce housing, but it has to be at least three months, so that's the sentiment from that housing production plan that has made its way into the zoning.
Mhm.
It's not like the specific strategic plan didn't specify that, but that's the interpretation we've had for the past
Right.
several years.
But when you take it down to a specific neighborhood, and the thing that we're talking about site coverage and neighborhood compatibility, the housing production plan doesn't talk about.
No,
that
it doesn't.
There's no,
Right.
nor does the strategic plan.
No, with the strategic plan, I read that last night again. There's there's some language in one of the first goals.
I'm not familiar with that. Doc.
You can make it,
You're so modest.
Just- yeah.
no, there's language, that's
No.
right in one of our goals, like, well,
Yes,
no, about community character.
Yeah.
Somewhere I got that idea.
Preserving neighborhood character.
Yes,
Yeah,
right.
it is, I read it
that's
last
the
night.
goal, but what we're struggling with is not the goal. What we're struggling with is the how you do that.
Mm.
Oh, yes, I
Right.
agree, but
Right.
it is articulated that
It-
this
it-
notion of,
The same way there's stuff in the zoning now that articulates some of
so
that
I just think we're getting
we're in
a
the
little
weeds.
off,
in the weeds.
but the issue that we're talking about is important. It's just really application of the bylaw. So I just want to go back, not to fixate on Shirt Left Road, but it's a good example. That's what Pat was saying. That project had a lot going on, and when you're trying to figure out how to evaluate it, they were moving things further away from the low point of the property. They were constrained by conservation issues anyways, but so we're taking a building that was closer to the resource area, getting rid of that, redesign the thing, pulling everything further away from the beach. As a result, you're on the higher part of the lot.
But
The house is unconformed to the height restriction. And so, I mean, there's all these factors where they're technically, and it's under this site coverage limit, so. Again, I just keep coming back to this, it's difficult to deal with a project that's under the height limit and under the max site coverage. And they're improving the situation by pulling things further away from the environmentally sensitive areas and all this stuff. But in that, there is still, going to Mary's point, there's still this language that says the board does have the ability to go in there and further shape it. Yes, it's 29 feet, but you're on the higher end of part of the lot, so maybe it has to be a lower building, or portions of it need to be lower slung roof line, whatever, but that, it's just difficult. It's just a difficult piece to get into it, so I guess I think the other thing that this is not a bylaw amendment piece, but like I said before, there is probably a better systematic way to do the site plan review. I think we need another workshop with the task force, the planning and zoning board to go through that, and that kind of have a really discussion about how, is everyone on the same page about how we are reading, interpreting, like kind of going through, we did this with the board, we had town council do it, so there's no doubt the board has the authority to dig into these things under the bylaw, but I think it's more of just like a working session of like, how do we want to do site plan review? How can we go through and better address all these things so we don't lose sight? So again, we're in the mix of like all this stuff. It's hard to account for everything because you're improving some things, like I said, moving things to a better location, but now you're on a higher part of the, I think it's hard for the board, it's hard for staff too, to like take into account every single criteria without, because you're always going to be it's always like you're improving something on this criteria, but you're losing something on the other one. And like to get everything perfectly accounted for is difficult to do. So every project is going to have something where it adds to. You impacted the view because you moved it to a higher spot, but it still conforms to the height bylaw. But if we are going to address the height bylaw, then we're going to be lower and you're going to be more spread. I mean,
Yeah.
it's very, very difficult. And I think we're still looking at everything case by case, which is unavoidable, but I think there's still difficulty with how to apply this bylaw and making sure the board's comfortable with being able to dig into the details and shape the projects.
Marty?
Paul, I would think that I think expanding the conversation to include the entire planning board and a few other groups and have a workshop, I think is a great idea for us to understand exactly what they're struggling with and see how, because for us to tweak this as a small group and then hope it fixes the problem and find out that the planning boards, that's not what they were expecting or not giving them the tools that they're asking for. So I'd be 100% in favor of that.
But the reason we're talking about and try, maybe inserting this data in was in response to feedback we got from the planning board. So that's where
Yeah,
I started
yeah.
with this. So maybe, so where we go.
And the select board.
But then,
We have-
when we get into the details, though, when we start talking about year-round houses versus non-winterized cottages, our ADU is going to count towards this. If we're going to put the neighborhood average into force, like you said, the state is allowing you to build an ADU by right. But if we're looking at the average and saying we're going to put a limit on it, does it make sense that we're counting the ADUs towards that? Because we're trying to produce more places to live.
Well, I mean, I just think we're gonna get clarity as to what we have, how the ADU is gonna intersect with this. Let me just do a time check, and I know this has been a very useful discussion. What I would say is we got 7 minutes before the commission, the Cape Cod Commission's coming on to talk to us about some of the other topics. There is we didn't even get to this, but Paul and I have been batting around something. I was asked at the select board meeting, Bob Brown particularly said, are you thinking of anything? Are you thinking of anything? And I said, no, we're just starting the discussion. He said, well, what is another alternative standard? And I said, well, there is a standard in Eastham that's been in place since 1961 in the National Seashore. And that covers 30% of our land. I said, and in the National Seashore, you're allowed to expand a maximum of your primary structure, 50%. So that's sort of an interesting thing to say. There's a really hard number. A third of our town already lives with that limitation. Is that something we should take a look at? Because we get away from having to calculate every neighborhood. And I, again, this is top of the head, and we really got to, and the select board all sort of nodded like, oh, just because it's been a standard that's been in place for like 70 years. So, is that something that might be an extended to the rest of the town? Just a concept, it would require a lot less technical and administrative oversight on the part of the planning department if there was, not to exceed 50% or not to, not to exceed the upper limit. Again, we need to really think through, and maybe we can look at projects, if you've got a 1,500 square foot home, you're getting maybe 750 more square feet versus 1,500 square feet in some lots. And does that make a difference?
So
Tom?
very quick suggestion, just to go on top of what you've been discussing. And by the way, I think that's a great idea. The 50%, although you got to deal with empty lots, vacant lots as to how you allow. But I'm concerned about the hard limit on a very narrow sample size, 300-foot radius. And I'm wondering if maybe we consider, not to complicate this too much, look at two different or multiple thresholds, one being, for example, in the case of Shirtlift, the whole road, right, as a limit, and another limit based on the 300-foot radius. Right. So if all your homes around you are very, very small, but the larger road, that if we define that as the neighborhood is larger, should there be some in between number that gets considered?
Well,
So just to throw out, because I think the discussion would be very good to have.
I think we could, when Carolyn Murray comes, our town council, we could,
Right.
because you get into situations that you can't do spot zoning. You can
Right.
create new overlay districts if we want to call, Shirtlift and Bay Ridge the coastal zone and have totally new roads for them, but without an overlay or historic districts often have, very specific rules that are different from the rest of the neighborhood. I mean, you could play that. And I just think it's a legal question of whether
Could
we
be,
can,
could be.
Yeah, I
whether
was
we can do
thinking the
that.
same thing and it struck me in reading some of the Cape Cod Commission model stuff that we're going to be talking about, that they talked about districts and then sub-districts.
Creating sub-districts,
And
yeah.
maybe what we're seeing is that there's certain areas in our town that face the bay or face the ocean, one or the other, that along one street, that become sub-districts in some way and are treated have a different standard because they are a different sub-district. Because if you do something along Thumpertown, which is kind of a main road, so to speak. As we started to see happening along Thumpertown. If you go 2 blocks in to one of the small little streets that's adjacent to Thumpertown, but it's not fronting on Thumpertown. It's a whole different kind of neighborhood. And so I think playing with the idea of sub-districts might be useful for us. As we think about this. And it's just something to think about. I don't know what your thought about that is. It makes it a little slightly bit more complicated.
Oh, I think it makes a lot.
Well, I don't know. I think it'd be fairly easy to define some of those. There are only a few key areas that.
Well, I mean, and we've said this is like next year, let's get climate action passed and we'll do, so the things that we're talking about that are giving us agita in terms of the bigness, this could be a whole other discussion about if a climate action plan if a proposal to do an overlay district on those coastal properties, that's what's in the coastal resiliency.
It's part of the right.
It creates a new sub-district.
Conservation Commission.
Well, it's both zoning and regulations, but
It's all of that.
I mean, so there's a little bit of, this is sort of an evolving kind of thing, like where does the town come down? Is it amenable and desiring to embrace that, those models we saw from the Cape Cod Commission, which talks about, and it captures all 100 properties on the coast and another 200 in floodplains and high velocity areas. Right. So that's, depending where the town goes on that, is going to take a lot of these properties that we're struggling with. And potentially, I mean, I'm not going to predict what will happen and, whatever, but the recommendations, and we're talking about, can you get a couple more feet? They're talking about, construction freezes, limits, management. I mean, they're saying to us, the weather is going to affect you so much, you better prepare for this. Again, we don't have the guidance to address that, but the same properties we're agitating over here are the same properties that are going to be in that discussion. So I'm not trying to kick the can down the road, but that's whatever. What do we have? 11 o'clock. We have Sarah. Hi, Sarah.
Good morning.
This is a conversation that will be continued. I don't mean to cut anyone off. We have, a few years ago when we dealt with this, I think we met a lot to consider this. And so it'll keep going.
It occurred to me Sarah, this is Carolyn. Hi.
Good morning.
One of the things we were talking about, a particular project that came to the planning board, and one of the issues was how a particular project would affect an abutter's view of the ocean or the bay or marshes or whatever. And that maybe we should ask the commission if they have any model language about views and protection of views from a zoning perspective. So
yeah,
we need to answer that now, but we'll
be thinking about, yeah. I don't think we don't have a model that was developed just for that purpose, but we may have something that takes that into account that we could pull sort of a little bit out to help you.
Yeah, I think because if we don't have anything good either at this point in the zoning or in the guidance by the planning board to address that issue.
Well,
I don't think.
Discovered it last night. That's why 104. Site plan approval for residential properties is for the rational protection in legitimate interests. Here's what it's for, of adjoining property owners, to encourage the construction of reasonably sensitive to the scale, size, and massing of buildings, to afford continual public access, visual access to ponds, rivers, marshes, and ocean, and to protect the environmental needs of the town.
Right.
That's what we have from 2001. Right. That's been on the books for 14 years.
Level, but it doesn't have.
That's the intent.
That's the intent.
That's the intent.
What I'm asking is, is there anything that's quantifies that?
No. I mean, but all of these things speak to intent. Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, it sounds like there's two
Proposed-
pieces to it also, right? I mean, it's both views to, it sounds like public waterways, as well as perhaps addressing the issue of maybe an addition or expansion of a structure that might get in the way of those views. So I don't know. Well, let me look into it, see if we have something that might be helpful to you in that regards.
Okay, we gotta move on to a new topic. We have, I don't know how you want to sit, Paul, if you want to do introductions, we've all received, and I think have read the, form-based code and the single-family, multi-family conversion. Did we agree or disagree to defer form-based codes, or we were kicking that around still?
Well, the discussion was whether we wanted to do it just for the
District E,
which is composed of about 15 properties, two of which are the town hall and police station, Windmill Green, so it's a small area. But yeah, because the model bylaw is for limited commercial and residential, so we thought residential is too much, but
okay. Well, we should talk about, I would say, that was not enthusiastically embraced by the select board.
correct.
Yeah, so,
I thought that the comments about, let's wait till we see how it
the
works,
DCPC.
how the DCPC
Yeah.
works out before we tackle this.
Tackle this, yeah, that was.
Might make
comment.
sense, yeah.
Yeah, that was the comment.
I had a different reaction to that comment when they said, let's see how it works out on the DCPC, because that's 10 or 15 to 20 years out before we see concrete results there. That I
Mhm.
think if we have a tool set that we have chosen to apply to such a critical part of the town, that it certainly makes sense that we either like this tool set and think it can be effective for the town, like we did for Northeastham, and that we continue it to the historic town center. I think waiting for results long term is the ultimate kick the can down the road response. So
Mhm.
I was disappointed I wasn't at the meeting, but I would have pushed back very hard on that comment.
No, I don't disagree with you. I guess, and we should start this conversation. I mean, part of the, it's not a hesitancy, Martin, on my part. Part of it is we have 10 agenda items.
Oh, I
And,
understand. Yeah.
a
You're
couple
looking at the
months,
workload as well. But
I'm looking at the workload going, how do we vet all these things? But having, that's our internal issue. Why don't we go, we got the commission staff, so why don't we have you guys, were you gonna, how are you gonna structure this, Paul?
Well, I guess. And we're trying to figure out. We have two model bylaws, task force, we're trying to figure out. If we have time this year to implement. Either one of them or both of them. So I guess I wanted to, have a discussion with Chloe and Sarah, just kind of get their. Kind of overview of how they think the model bylaw could be utilized in Eastham, and then get a sense of. How much work it might be. I think the single family to multifamily bylaw. Is a useful tool, I think, and we talked about this last time, I think. Just kind of the easiest application that we all can picture is kind of like, yeah, we got the antique homes, the big sea captain homes that could easily be. Internally subdivided into apartments or condos, and from the out, we get the density. With the same, and keep the aesthetic value and all that, but. It. Not necessarily, it could be limited to that kind of application. But the bylaw kind of speaks to a broader application. So I guess that's just part of the discussion of like. Can we take on these bylaws and do we do it in a more targeted. Kind of pilot. A piece of it for both of them. Again, we talk about maybe just District D and maybe just a certain. Type of building, and Sarah and I talked about this offline a little bit about. Maybe it is targeted at the single to multifamily, maybe it is targeted more at, as a type of building conversion that we would allow as opposed to like the use. Broadly across the, so again, it's a smaller way to intro it. The bylaw, So we were just kicking around things. So I guess I'll leave it there. I guess maybe if you don't mind, Sarah and Chloe, just kind of maybe your thoughts on the bylaws as you were developing them and how you envisioned them being used by different towns. Maybe that's a good starting point.
Sure. Well, so let me start by I'm not sure that everyone has met either me or Chloe. So maybe just start with introduction. So I'm Sarah Korjeff, planner and preservation specialist with the commission, very involved in the Northeast MDCPC and other projects, and happen to live in Eastham too, which makes me very familiar with the area. But I'll let Chloe, our chief planner, introduce herself too.
Sure. Chloe Schaefer, Chief Planner. And I can just very broadly, I guess, kick off. So these two model bylaws were developed along with two other ones as really resources to support implementation of our regional housing strategy, which we completed in 2024. So I think, as with all of them, they are models and are meant to be taken and then tailored to really suit a town's needs and desires, how in whatever way they want, but hopefully providing kind of that foundation to start from, so you're not starting from scratch. And they do have, I think, different components, certainly, and different places where they would be applicable when you're thinking about the design-driven or form-based code light one versus the single-family to multifamily conversion. But really, all of these developed with the goal of looking to provide more housing in the region, but in those areas that can support it and in our existing housing stock and in those already developed areas, really focusing on redevelopment and protecting those areas that aren't developed or are sensitive. So that's a very high level overview, but I think now I'll hand it back to Sarah to talk a little bit more specifically and how they might be best suited for Eastham.
Sure. So I guess I'd like to start with the single family to multifamily bylaw, because I really do think that that is the simplest model, and it's also extremely flexible. So Paul did mention to me the idea of identifying historic homes that are larger and possibly allowing them to be converted from single family to multifamily could be a great target and provide some additional opportunities that might encourage preservation of those buildings. So I like the idea of that. I also think the town might want to look at sort of areas within a easy walking radius of services and centers. So, a half a mile radius potentially to the Northeast Dam Town Center and to the town hall area, and maybe there are even other parts of town that you feel provide some density of services that it would make sense to encourage conversion in those areas. And I think what's nice about the bylaw is it acknowledges you can define how many multifamily units you want to allow in those areas. So you could, for example, and I'm really just throwing this out for sort of an illustration, you could, for example, say that in historic buildings, you don't want to see more than 3 units created. So you could allow by right the conversion from single family to 3 multifamily units, but then you could decide that if there are other areas like around town hall where there are properties you'd like that it would be appropriate to see even more, you could allow in that area conversion from single family to multifamily of up to 10 units or whatever you think is appropriate. And I think the key really is defining what you want to see and make that be allowable by right. And then if there are things that you're uncertain about, you think they might be appropriate, but you have some concerns, you could then make those allowable by special permit. And I guess, we understand this is intended to be sort of a discussion. So if anyone has any questions or, wants to jump in at any point.
Sarah, if we were to target historic homes, we have a situation right now where the definition of something that comes up for historical review properties, I believe, over 75 years old,
75.
which is like more than half our town. So is it things that have been put on some historic designation list that you would target? Because, I mean, if we just said historic under the 75-year-olds or more, we could be blanketing most of the town. I'm trying to differentiate there.
Sure. So there's a lot of different ways you could do it. Obviously, I think Eastham has done an excellent job of inventorying their historic properties throughout town. So I think you could specifically tie it either to those properties that have been inventoried in the state's and are now identifiable in the state's database, or you could specifically say buildings, prior to 1900, or you could find, there's a couple of different ways depending on, if you're concerned about building the number of properties that you're that you're making available for conversion. If you're concerned about a particular area, I guess there's the inventory of properties. There's a modest number of properties on the National Register of Historic Places, around Town Hall. If you just limited it to that, I think you would perhaps be targeting a much smaller number than you would like. And then there's, of course, the Old Town Center Historic District, which you could allow conversion there, acknowledging that those projects will still be subject to review by the Historic District Commission if they're making any kind of exterior alterations.
We can develop our definition of historic for the purpose
For the
of this,
purpose,
but
yeah.
it doesn't have to be just the definition used for
Yeah.
this.
I just needed to know whether there is the ability to differentiate. A second question I have is, when I read your model bylaw, it got into sort of single-family conversions, and they kept, and they even talked about you could have like a 15 or 1400 square foot house that you convert like to 700 square foot units, and they call them internal ADUs. And so I want to know whether, we're waiting for some clarity in terms of whether our current ADU bylaw is good, and under seasonal communities, is there things we have to change? So is there any crosswalk between internal ADUs, the way you're classifying that, and the balance of the ADUs? I mean, are these related in any way?
So I'm going to start this, but I might ask Chloe to jump in too. My understanding, I don't believe we use the term internal ADUs in the single family to multifamily conversion. I think we identified that there's a difference that, an ADU is usually a subordinate unit to whatever the single family home is. And this is a bylaw that would create multiple standard units that could be bought and sold separately, which is one way that it makes it different from the ADUs, and it provides for a different type of ownership. I don't know, Chloe, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think Sarah hit on the key points. I think within the guidance document, we did want to recognize that in some towns, their ADU bylaws, it calls out specifically an internal ADU and allowing that. And forgive me because I'm not sure, Paul, what your requirements are there, but just to make the distinction between a single family home conversion to multiple units versus if someone, we're trying to understand what is the difference between converting a single family home into 2 units under this potential model bylaw versus under your accessory dwelling unit bylaw. And I think Sarah hit on the key points there where they would both be principal dwelling units potentially under this bylaw versus with an ADU under single ownership. So.
Right, and I guess it does give you a little more flexibility with the size of the units too, right? Because ADUs typically have a more constrained size.
Yeah.
Right. So it talks about a subordinate unit. ADUs create a subordinate unit, either within or outside an existing structure. So what would be the difference between just two units, one was larger than the other one, and this subordinate unit, which seems to be an ADU? It's
So-
page 15.
Yep. Yeah, so what this is, again, I think just trying to describe is that when you are developing an ADU, there is typically you have your principal unit and then you have your accessory dwelling unit, which is subordinate. But in the case of this model bylaw, you wouldn't necessarily have that hierarchy if you're creating two dwelling units. And one might be bigger, one might be smaller, that's okay, but they could both be principal dwelling units. If so desired, they could be in a condo form where they're both sold off and have separate ownership. An ADU doesn't allow for that. And so there is the ADU is a subordinate unit to the primary home on a lot. And so there is that distinction. I don't know, Paul, if correct me if I'm
Yep, no, that's right.
if anything would be helpful within your
an
context.
ADU then in a big house, right, that is converted to, let's say, two dwelling units. The ownership would be under, for an ADU, would the ownership be under that principal homeowner's? It would be
Yeah.
part of that, where
Yes.
in this conversion of a single family to, let's say, two, they're sort of independent.
It could be independent,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, it allows
Okay,
for that
thanks.
possibility.
Yeah. That's good. That's enough for now.
I think one of the policy issues we would have to, the issues of density and usage and short-term rentals and everything in neighborhoods is sort of not is impacts that have with this. But every bylaw that we have allowed conversions over the last 5 years is because we're trying to achieve an increase. I mean, our goal is to disincentivize the creation of new market homes, which will be financed through short-term rentals. I mean, that's been a sort of our policy mandate really coming from the board. And so you'll see every bylaw we've passed allows conversions, but it allows conversions if they're year-round rental housing. So how is that incompatible with your bylaw, the single-family conversion? Because we have not been allowing the proliferation of more condos.
No, I think it's completely consistent with what you've been doing.
Right.
The model bylaw does have a provision where you can prohibit short-term rentals, just like you've done in other cases. And it also has some other, important pieces like making sure that you have the wastewater capacity on the site. And I think one of the other elements that's really up to the town to consider is it allows for, or it suggests that you allow for modest additions to existing buildings in order to accommodate, say, a second kitchen or a new entry for the new unit that's created. But you can actually limit the size of those additions that you allow if that's a concern. If you really want to try to maintain the scale of existing buildings while you're allowing for additional units, you can limit the size of those additions to just a couple hundred square feet.
And not only the size, but I like the way the model bylaw talked about the placement of the
Mhm.
addition.
Right, to the side or rear. Mhm.
Side or rear, so that it doesn't affect the front
And how did,
side.
and I guess it would be all dependent upon septic and a lot of other things, but is it conceivable that someone could do a single family conversion? And then also, because they have by right, put an ADU on the site if there was enough? I mean, I'm just trying to get a sense of, if someone wanted to say, I'm gonna split my ranch house, I'm gonna get, one or two rentals out of that. And then could they also build an ADU in the backyard above the garage or is that?
Or if they sell that, if they split their ranch house into two units, then each unit is sold separately, and then each unit can add an ADU by right.
I don't know if that's the case, because isn't it one ADU per property?
But if
Not
we're
per
going to allow
unit.
these to be, but if we allow
dwelling.
these new multifamilies to be sold separately, Now
Right,
they're
but they're
both-
still on the same property?
I see, yeah, because you're on so the
Right.
lot is still a condo lot, it's the same lot, one plot.
So the new state requirements make it that an ADU is allowed by right for each principal dwelling unit. So right now in Eastham, unless you're in the DCPC districts, you cannot do multifamily. So you can only build a single family house or a duplex. You can't do multifamily anywhere outside of that. What this bylaw would do, so if you're splitting it into 2 units. I mean, you're creating a duplex, which is allowed, and then you could, in theory, have an ADU that go with each duplex, so 4 units. But what you can't do right now is split up a single family home into more than 1 unit,
More than two. Right.
more than 2 units.
Right.
So if you do that, I mean, you're essentially creating you're converting it into an apartment building, maybe under condo ownership, but you're essentially creating an apartment building, multiple units. The ADU bylaw does not entitle the owner of each unit, so you split that big old house into 8 units. All 8 units, you're not entitled to have an ADU, eight ADUs, because that's not the single family dwelling. It's a multifamily dwelling. It's a multi-units within a single building.
Okay, so let me rephrase to be sure I understood. So somebody has a big old house, they split it into 2 units under multifamily conversion, and that makes it a duplex, and that's allowed.
So, but they can do that now.
They can do that now.
You don't need, that's not multifamily.
I understand.
That's just
They
creating.
can do that now. And then year 2, each of those, could they each add and split their part of the house into an internal ADU and a primary dwelling? So that there,
Yes.
ultimately you would end up with 4,
Yes, right now,
right?
with current bylaws and everything, yes. You
Yes,
could do that.
that's what.
Unless we've restricted these conversions that they have to be owner, that they're not condos. I mean, right now in all the other bylaws, we haven't allowed this stuff to flip to condos. Like even in the duplex, one has to be owner occupied.
Yes,
You would
The other one have to be
still have to adhere to the site coverage
yes,
limit,
Yeah.
your wastewater capacity.
right, wastewater.
And the
yeah.
ADU, if they were doing an internal ADU, which is allowed, that ADU would have to remain tied to the main
Right,
dwelling, the ownership, and it would have to be prohibited from a short-term rental and all that.
right.
But yeah,
And probably minimum size requirements, right?
Yeah, and we have the minimum
size requirement, all that, and
Yeah,
wastewater and made septic and all that, yeah.
Mhm.
But to Sarah's question, currently, our ADU is not 1 per property, it's 1 per principal dwelling, right?
Okay, so
So
it
that-
you could have either 1 or 2 if you have either a principal dwelling or a duplex. I see
Yeah,
that.
yeah, split into a duplex, each duplex then could have an ADU, internal or extra.
We're waiting
That
for
was,
the
that was,
final-
that was the point I was trying to make earlier. Are we opening up that possibility?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we are,
That was the
I mean,
discussion we
it
had
depends
last
how we
year.
write it. If it's rental, we're still keeping it with single ownership.
right,
The guidance I'm hearing from the Attorney General's office is they're interpreting it that it's tied to principal dwelling. We had this discussion last year when we were
right,
because we actually were thinking we didn't want that.
right,
The zoning task force said we wanted to limit it to 1 per property,
right.
but the AG's already indicated that, so.
Right.
So
And-
duplex,
Hmm.
if you have a duplex, in theory, you could have 2 ADUs,
And
1 ADU for each
Right.
unit.
as an advocate for the housing production plan, having 2 ADUs instead of 1 it gets us 2 more units. I mean, it's just, yeah,
But again,
as long as.
I'm looking for legal clarification because there's a question about whether we can prohibit short-term rentals, but there's an open legal question about whether we can mandate tenure. So
Right,
that concept of year-round rental units may be a question mark, and even with the ADUs. And one of the concerns I've talked to Paul about, because we've seen a little bit of this. You get zoned and approved for an ADU, you build an ADU. The only thing in the state building code that means you're not an ADU is that stove. You can take out that stove and now you de facto have a guest house. Now that's in violation of what you brought before the planning board, but then it gets back to an enforcement. If you can't make someone rent year round, you could just prohibit them from doing short-term rentals. And they could theoretically just take the stove out and have a glorified guest house, which kind of goes against the intent of what ADUs are. How, and this isn't just hypothetical. There's been a couple inquiries that might suggest this. So I get a little concerned, because then it gets back to enforcement. Is the town really going to, say you're in violation of your thing, and we want you to just spend $40,000, and if you're not gonna keep this as a rental, we're gonna try to enforce you to bring it to an original state? I mean, there's a loophole here that is not being thought through with ADUs.
Well, I guess I go back to the purpose of zoning, which is to regulate land use, but not what happens within the building. And so if somebody builds an ADU and they're not doing short-term rental, so it's not to create that, and we can't force them to live there full-time or 6 months or 9 months or something. That's the owner's choice.
Exactly, but
Yeah.
we're allowing more of this to happen. Right now, they can't do it. And so if the person who bumps up against development limits and can't get all sort of the in-law apartment done, just kind of sort of de facto makes a lot of guest houses. We've added intensity without addressing the affordable housing, affordable housing crisis. So there's just some unintended, and well,
That's separate.
that's a separate.
But what this model bylaw is create, not ADUs, they would be creating multiple single-family dwelling units within.
One structure.
Yes, in one structure.
Would it be, sorry, Paul, finish, Paul, sorry.
No, that's it.
So would it be possible for us to say, if you're going to go down this path of doing the single family to multifamily conversion, that you forfeit your ADU rights?
No.
You can't.
No, yes, you're taking it, that's what this whole thing is. You're taking a single family dwelling, which I have a single family dwelling. Right now, I'm entitled by right to put an ADU on as long as I have my septic and all that. I am forfeiting it because now I'm converting my single family dwelling to a multifamily dwelling. I'm basically converting my house into an apartment building, breaking it up into individual units.
Right.
And the apartment buildings are differentiated from a single family dwelling as far as the ADU bylaw. So that's what I was saying before. So you are forfeiting that. I break it up into a 5-unit apartment building.
Right.
All the individual apartments aren't entitled by right to an ADU.
Right. But if you change it from single to double, you're creating a duplex, which would still work with the ADU.
Right, but I think we should differentiate between and this is probably the model bylaw, it's allowing, you can already create a duplex. So this model bylaw is really saying you want to create 3+, convert your single family into 3+ units.
Okay. So I think that's a key point. If we collectively agree, then the purpose of this single family conversion is for somebody who wants to take the principal dwelling and make it into 3 or more units.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the way to differentiate.
That you just gave.
But I think we've missed something here. Paul, are you saying that we already have the right throughout the town to convert a single family to a duplex?
Yeah, we made that change the first year. Anything over 30,000 square feet, with setbacks and, X, Y, and Z, whatever. All the other rules, you can do that now. And since we've passed that,
So that's 3/4 of an acre. That's a pretty steep, that cuts off a very large part of the town.
But even with that standard, has anyone taken hold of that and not a single duplex has been created, even with
Well-
loosening in that?
So sorry, I know Chloe and Sarah are getting
Yeah.
the inside trip.
That's okay.
So for many, many years before anything with the zoning task force, this section of the bylaw was already on the books, like by right, residential zoning, single family and duplex are allowed. They have been for decades. There was a section of the bylaw that allowed a provision for older units, older lots that were created before 1988. You could do a duplex on less than an acre. So our minimum lot size right now is 40,000 square feet. So you can do a single family or a duplex. Sorry, back up. Single family, 40,000 square feet is the minimum. For a duplex, 80,000 square feet is the minimum. There has been this piece in the bylaw for many, many years that for older lots that were created before 1988, you could do a duplex on 40,000 or 30,000. There's different date thresholds. So that's been on the books for a long time. The adjustment that the task force made a few years ago was for the new lots that were created. New subdivisions new lots that were created could do the duplex, but they are also required that the units they create have to be year-round rental or owner occupied or affordable. So there's different subsets of things going on, but basically if I had a lot that was created in 1970 and I got 30,000 square feet, 1970 lot, I can put a duplex on that. And I don't have to have I'm not tied to any affordability or anything. I can just put a duplex on it.
Right. Yeah, and there's no requirement for no short-term rental or
Yeah,
anything else.
that was all legacy protected.
Right.
So
Exactly.
So that was the adjustment we made a couple of years ago.
Okay.
So in the model bylaw, would we change it from where it says minimum number of new dwelling units is 1 a conversion to avoid conflicting with our current duplex?
And I think
bylaw?
yeah, again, all these model bylaws, you gotta make the.
Yeah, I guess
For local, but I think that would be something to differentiate between just doing a duplex because really I look at it as it's a way to create an apartment building, a multiple, whatever you want to call it, but it's basically an apartment building.
Or 3 condos.
Or 3 condos. Well, the condo is the ownership, but.
And yeah, that's a policy decision that would be a diversion from what we've historically done.
So I guess that's where we're getting back into, if we wanted to implement this, is there a way to do it incrementally perhaps? And that's where we were talking about. I think the thing that is easier in everyone's mind to visualize is that, I keep repeating this, but just the old antique sea captain's house, which outside it doesn't change, maybe there's some modest additions to accommodate, but basically everyone loves that house. But inside, no one's the wiser because there's actually 5 apartments in there. You get the density without sacrificing the community character. And that's just the easiest example, I think, for people to visualize. But of course, it could be other types of buildings, but.
I just have to say that until this meeting and until, Sarah mentioned this, I hadn't really focused on historic because when you think of the whole town and single family and these small lots and all the discussions we have about density and neighborhood impact, I've been like, ooh, what's the unintended consequences of this? There could be things. But going back to some of Martin's original proposals around this, the large antique house that can't economically be the single family, as opposed to having it, taken down or manipulated in some way. I think that's a great focus area. And given that we can put some definition around historic, and sort of see how does this work? I mean, if you say to a neighborhood, you know, the architectural image of this is going to remain the same, which is a primary thing, but the economics will change because we're going to give owners more ability to generate cash flow for that property. I don't know, the whole town, given all the complexities of this town and that 85% of our town land area is less than 40,000 square feet with a huge preponderance of 10 and 20,000 square foot lots. I think the implication of density and usage and is just something we're going to have to think about carefully.
Yeah, I agree, Mary. I think we keep going back and forth on these. These are two very different issues. I think the antique house piece is a great storyline that's going to affect a handful of buildings potentially that could also go down the special permit path. But if we really want to have an impact on housing production, we have to honestly look at these neighborhoods where there's people living on 15,000, 20,000 square feet. You have a 1,400 square foot ranch or Old Cape. These are quiet neighborhoods. Are we comfortable with the idea that those houses that are going to be affordable, are we comfortable with the fact that we could allow those houses to be converted modestly into two families and then get sold off as a two family to make more affordable housing for working people? And we have to have the idea that we have to, because saying that we're doing it for 30,000 or more, and then looking back and saying, oh, nobody ever did it. You know, if you wanted, the current law says 30,000 square feet or more, and we're going to put restrictions on affordability, year-round occupancy, no short-term rentals. I'm all in favor of some of that, like the short-term rentals. But if we're really trying to target the idea of having people have affordable housing within walkable neighborhoods, and let's face it, when we talk about density, these neighborhoods are a lot less dense than they ever were in the past because we don't have 4 and 5 kids per house. We've got couples owning these houses. So they might be more dense when we look at the built-out infrastructure, but our neighborhoods are not more dense when it comes to actual people walking on the street and making places livable. So I'm in favor of extending this to the smaller houses, the smaller lots, and let's build walkable, livable communities as the focus of this, and not get not get too tied up on the historical houses, because that's almost a different marketplace and a different type of, you know, they can conflict with each other. So we have to treat this, in my view, as two different topics.
I'm just saying this conversion is not part of any housing strategy that we have. We have a broad-based imperative to try to create more rental housing and de-incentivize the creation of market rate housing so I mean, this has been like a policy umbrella that.
Right. So we do that we do that by having the short-term restriction on them. And if they want to be sold off, if somebody wants to sell half their ranch house and they're going to, as a condo, and they're going to maintain a shared septic system, that's the essence of single family to multifamily conversion, as I've read this bylaw.
I would agree, and if it creates home ownership opportunities that are affordable, that's part of the housing production plan. It's not just rental.
Are we gonna put affordability deed restriction? I mean,
no, but by definition, if it's a small enough size, it's not gonna be a $1 million house.
no, it's not gonna be $1 million house, but it's not still gonna be a local. I mean, this would be interesting to look at the economics of this because, you know, I'm not sure we're gonna get what we want.
I think I disagree, Mary. I think this is where you get the biggest bang for the buck. This is where you have the least amount of development, the least amount of trucks rolling in, pouring new foundations, clearing lots, knocking down older houses to redevelop them. When somebody has a 1,500 square foot house, they can either sell it and let somebody build something to max out the lot, or they can split it in half and continue to live there and either rent or sell the other half. It's going to be a different way of looking at it, but there's a different future in front of us. We're not having families with 4 kids. You know, there's just not the demand for well, there's a demand for a lot more smaller living units, and that's where affordability is able to, you know, hit the marketplace.
Well, and I would, I mean, I think one of the big policy issues for this town is if we do not increase families coming here, we have much larger issues. We need housing for kids. I mean, we need to bring families back and we need to incentivize that. More part-time residents. I mean, we've got an imbalance in this town with 60%.
I wasn't advocating anything for part-time residents in what I said.
No, but you can't mandate year-round tenancy. So who would buy these? It's going to be a cheaper way to getting into a summer home. We're going to continue.
It's also it's a cheaper way to get into a first home. It's a cheaper way to get on the property ladder. It's a cheaper way for a fireman or a policeman or a teacher to not only find a job in town, but to find their first place to live.
Yes. Yes.
And build equity, which is part of homeownership.
Okay.
Well, yes, I just want
I
to
get it.
continue to clarify. So I think
Yep.
this is this model bylaw is different than creating a duplex, splitting it into 2 units. Again, you can do that right now.
All right.
Oh, again, yeah, just for clarity, again, on older lot, you can do that on 30,000 square feet. On a newer lot, you can do it on 40,000 square feet. So the duplex.
Those lots, those 40,000 square foot lots are so rare in town hall that no one is going to invest. And we've seen the fact that it's not happening because those lots are going to be sold to somebody who wants to build a larger house.
Well,
I know, but I guess I'm saying multifamily is different than a duplex. So this is just, we're trying to figure out how to apply this bylaw.
okay.
Can I jump in?
Yes, please.
Yes. And then Tom.
I was just going to say that if you want us to discuss the other bylaw, I think Chloe and I
Yes,
both
we should
need
do
to
that.
leave at
We need to
noon.
do that right now.
But let me just to sort of round out the discussion about single family to multifamily conversion. I guess I would recommend that you consider a way to start small if you're concerned about it, by identifying one part of town, whether it's District E around Town Hall or whether it's some other area that you think that it's really appropriate. It's maybe the first place that you'd like to see this kind of conversion happen. And if perhaps target that and then get comfortable with it, work out any bugs and then expand it as you wish. That's an option that's available to you. But just briefly moving on to the other, what we call the design-driven bylaw, I think you're all somewhat familiar with it because many elements of this bylaw were incorporated into the Northeastham zoning. It really focuses on what a building looks like and how it's located on the property in an effort to create a pedestrian-friendly environment and more of a Main Street kind of community or more of a small-scale residential. You can really decide what type of community you're trying to build physically and sort of set your dimensional regulations and your design regulations to follow that. So the model bylaw has 5 different districts. Knowing that you're looking at this potentially for District E around Town Hall, I'm not sure that area fits easily into any one of the sort of sample districts that we've created in the bylaw. I think it probably falls somewhere in between the village center limited density and a residential, or maybe even with a few elements of the mixed commercial district. So given that, I feel like one of the most important things will be for the task force to decide really what you want that area to look like. I don't know whether the town has done much visioning for that area, but if you're looking to have buildings either expanded or infill buildings, then I think you need to know what height and sort of what setbacks from the road you're looking for, and are they are they just along Route 6, or is it including the area around the Windmill Green? There's a lot of different questions, I think, that you probably need to answer before you'll be able to design all of those dimensional regulations to be what you want.
And Paul, the District E, is that, you said it's limited commercial and some residential, or?
Yeah, the actual name of the district is limited commercial, residential, limited commercial.
So when we look at the use table, are we looking at limited commercial as the primary, or it has,
So right now, it's residential and limited commercial District D, an area of limited commercial development compatible with residential character. The only uses that are enumerated are banks, professional offices, real estate offices, gifts, craft shops, antique shops, and furniture repair shops, and residences. And then residential apartments are allowed above permitted businesses, if no more than 50% of the structure. So it's really, so we already have pre-existing non-conforming, so the 7-Eleven, the Superette, those aren't even allowed, they're just pre-existing non-conforming. It's very limited, it's basically, so that's part of this. What do we want it to look like? Are those the right uses? So I mean, this is based on the form, but I think also the uses going forward, like what types of buildings do we want? And are those the right uses? Like,
Right. And do you envision sort of a walkable community, or how do you accommodate Route 6 traveling right through the center of it? So there, I think I like the idea of, spending some time studying that area and thinking about it. But I do think it's going to require some visioning. It's not as easy a step forward, perhaps, to imagine how this would fit in that area as it is with the first model bylaw we talked about.
I think Sarah just raised an interesting point to consider. The Windmill Green is not in the District D. It's adjacent to it, but I mean, the area right across the street here surrounding, do we want that to be part of this? And also incidentally, that has a number of the green's surrounded by, pretty much totally by historic buildings, which could, in theory, be part of the multifamily conversion. I mean, then you kind of think, you start to see, like, is this another neighborhood, village center node where you have the walkable, you have the multifamily.
Where is the boundary of District D? On the west side? Is it Route 6? Why
I
is
think it's the
village-
properties fronting Route 6, right?
Yeah. It ends at the Superette, just doesn't,
And does it go up to Locust?
no. So on the other
Or-
side, ends at Superette, yeah.
I mean Depot.
Yeah.
It doesn't go to Depot? Oh,
and
So it
Basically
goes
just-
down past the post office and that the service station, right?
Correct, yeah. So yeah, it's basically just
but not a
front,
lot of, doesn't go down?
no.
Okay, so one thing we could consider. Would we want to consider changing the definition for District D? So part to Sarah's point about visioning, do we want along Depot and the library and to amend it to include that in it? Because it's really part of, when we think of that neighborhood, that's what we think of,
Yeah, so that's just another point to consider.
right?
It's not,
well, this could be in terms of workload and what we can achieve. I think we really need to look at the maps and the properties aren't like hundreds of properties. We're talking about, what'd you just say, 11
yeah,
properties?
even if we expanded it, yeah, it would be
Yeah, I mean-
under 50, probably, I'd count them up 20 some odd properties.
So I guess one of the thoughts might be maybe a this year thing is if we look at this and say, yeah, we would like to have this area with some specialized zoning because of its visibility and historic nature, et cetera. we could potentially change the district boundaries this year and follow it up with design. I mean, I'm just saying, if we
Yeah.
want to break it up. I mean, I'm just thinking how much will get done, but
That
it could be
might,
a two-step process.
currently for District E, are there other areas in the current zoning that call out it separately, other than the use table? Call out separately for what you can and can't do in District E?
No, that's it. Those are the
Oh,
uses.
okay. So maybe this year, all we do is say we want to change the definition of District E. So we include around the village green, so that it becomes part of the district. And then when we have more time, next year, that leads to some visioning, to Sarah's point about what does the town want this area to be and to
Yeah.
grow, to look like.
And we have a gap too between, correct me if I'm wrong, the DCPC ends just opposite the salt pond, correct? It doesn't
No,
come,
at Arnold's, right?
oh, it's on.
Arnold.
So now
Farther
we
up.
have sort of a I mean, again, this is a larger conversation about District D, but do we
Right.
consider the Inn at Oaks up to, the National Seashore is an extension of that?
Well,
That's
I
not
would
just-
caution you to any expansion of commercial uses along Route 6. I mean, that was one of the biggest
right.
concerns
Yeah.
in the DCPC, so I'd hate to see you, um, I guess, make that kind of change in the southern part of town along Route 6 without some really serious
Right.
investigation.
Okay, but right now is that in residential only? So we don't,
What?
the area between town hall
It's
and,
residential.
it's just residential only, so we're not concerned that would get some inappropriate business that,
Right, but the stretch along Route 6, again, is maybe an area that we want to consider for a single multi-residential, because
Yes,
where it would be appropriate to have some higher
Yep.
density units, but not the commercial activity.
right.
yep. Okay. We have 5 minutes. Other questions while we have the folks? So Sarah, hearing the nature of this discussion, I know you have other things to do other than think about Eastham. And Sarah, unfortunately, I'm glad for you because you've announced a retirement. When is that happening?
It's actually the end of next week.
Oh.
But don't worry, because you're in
Do a few things for us.
you're in good hands. We've got a great team at the commission.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
well, now we know who to recruit for open positions on some of these boards in town. Who's going to have some spare time?
We have one vacant seat, Sarah.
Sarah, you need to join our task force.
Right, so we're giving her 2 weeks to enjoy retirement.
Hold on. We want to run ZBA. Hold on.
Yeah, no, Sarah, welcome.
Welcome.
Oh, my.
Well, I mean, you've heard some of the conversations we've had about these two bylaws, and could you sort of debrief the team and if there's any information, based on this discussion or advice that you could, communicate to Paul so he could loop it back, only you for the next week, but the other team members?
Oh,
That would
yeah.
Be very helpful. Because
Yeah.
we, as usual, I mean, it's October, but we've got to come with recommendations by early January, so we're in a compressed time, and
Mhm.
what we do this year versus what we defer, we just, it's always better if we have good, solid evidence and data that we can stand behind, that makes the pitch to why we should do things easier. Whenever there's ambiguity, it's really hard, so. But
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, we're happy. I think, the commission, and I'm sure Chloe would say exactly the same thing. The commission is very interested in seeing these model bylaws implemented in some towns. They've been out there for a short time, but they haven't been picked up really as a model, or little pieces of them have been used in other towns across the Cape, but we'd love to see them used more. I think based on what we've heard today, I would say the single family to multifamily seems like the easier step forward for you to take. And, I think our staff would like to assist with making that happen as you guys go forward.
Okay. Thank
But
you.
Chloe will be your contact person, and obviously she's juggling, requests from all the other towns on the Cape too. So that's the main balancing act that we'll be playing.
But we'll become your favorite town.
Right. And Chloe, what town do you live in? So we can recruit you.
Chloe's a Chatham girl.
Well, I'm not in Eastham. Yeah, you can't
Yeah.
recruit me. So.
Okay. All right. Any other questions before folks sign off? Thank you so much for your time.
Right.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Nice to
Okay,
see you
take
all.
care.
Good luck with
Thanks.
everything.
Thank you.
Congratulations on your retirement, Sarah.
Well, thank you
Yes,
very
and
much.
enjoy.
He was retiring?
Yeah.
Yes, you missed it. You were out.
Oh,
No.
oh,
All right, folks. I will see you around town.
yes.
All right.
Take care.
Okay. We're at the end of our time here, and I guess we'll have to just kick to the next meeting. I know, and I think Jackie has taken some of the lead on some of the camper storage stuff, as well as Paul. I don't know if I know you've been working on definitions. Do you think before the next meeting, maybe just to fast forward some of these things, if there's any analysis or work, you could send it to the team so we could go back and tackle those things
Yeah, so
right off the top?
Jackie's already
She's already done it.
a bunch of info on
Okay.
fences from different.
Great.
So happy to give those to Mark, and I can email you this. See you. Thanks.
Thank you. Oh,
So for your review, comparison of some towns on Cape, some towns off Cape, some suggestions.
thank you.
Well,
Thank you. So we will have this. Some definitions, Paul, or just
Yeah, so done a little work on,
some definitional stuff?
some of them, yeah.
Okay, I mean, let's, as I said, if you've got 3 or 4, why don't we queue them up and just keep rolling them forward? And then the camper issue, are we prepared for the next meeting to
Yeah, I
dig into
mean,
that one?
yeah, I have something drafted up.
Okay, okay. Great. Well, if you could send anything out ahead of time so we could read and be a little more efficient with that.
I told Mary, the camper and the fence discussion, I talked to my grandsons, 15-year-old sophomores at the high school. I said, we're having this discussion and going to be coming up with some rules, and this is your future, not mine. I'll be gone. So, you need to tell me what you think. So as we're driving around, they start noticing and talking about campers and fences, and I'll point something out, say, do you like this or not like this? Do you think that's good or not good? It's been interesting. Their points of view have been very interesting. So I'll bring those up at our next meeting.
Yeah, that's great that you have that resource.
Well, and it could.
my 10-year-old has lots of thoughts that she. She asked me what the age limit is for participating.
Right. Well, it does occur to me, we don't think about using the high school sometimes as they have lots of interesting groups and using them to do test cases and modeling and visioning.
Yeah.
It could be very interesting as a adjunct to what we do.
Yeah.
Exactly.
No, that's
I think that would be wonderful.
I know too.
I know the Seashore has used it in the years past, used
Right.
the kids, and it's great.
Because they're very, in general, I would say they're very outspoken about their points of view, and they have points of view.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to create like a public policy student.
Yes.
Or advisory or something.
Yeah.
Yes.
Some sort of internship program where they participate.
Yeah.
I think that would be great.
So what's next on the neighborhood averages? Is there anything we should be looking at in between? Just, I'm not sure how we finished out that
That
discussion.
conversation.
Well, I think we gotta continue that conversation. Maybe Paul, the notion of do we try to specify specific averages versus do we come up with, do we extend the National Seashore model? Maybe the two of you, Jackie and Paul, might want to just, it would be helpful for us to say, get your opinions. Okay, you guys would have to admit it. There's the policy issues and then there's the, can we administer this? And, if we stay with the neighborhood average, what are the requirements we would have to do? What are the issues we have to think about? And, it sounds simple to just, go with the National Seashore Standard, given that it's been a third of the towns lives under it, but is there unintended consequences of that?
I'll just throw out there that the thing to keep in mind with that seashore limit is it was set at a very specific point in time when the
Mhm.
federal statute was passed.
Yep,
So it's not just 50%, it's 50% of what the property was. in
was it that
1952.
1952? Yep.
And so
And they.
I
Yeah,
don't,
that's all.
off the top, cannot imagine how we do that townwide
Oh, I'm not,
today.
yeah.
Just to know, so it's not just that it's 50%, it's 50%.
it could be
from
50% of the
1952.
existing structures, I mean, that's
Then
an
you get
important point.
into, yeah,
Are there any,
hasn't.
best practices or precedences around the country that
You'll have
have
to
done this
research
kind of
that.
thing? Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure that there are examples.
But
Whether
I
they're working or
did-
not, I don't know.
I
But
did
I'm
just a
sure.
little bit of searching and didn't find much. There seemed to be a lot of discussion, but not a lot put into practice from what I could find anyway.
When we did development limits, we only really came up with 2 or 3 examples, but a really current one was Tisbury and Martha's Vineyard, which was, we kind of, I won't say we modeled a lot after that, but we thought a lot about the Tisbury example. But, all right, we've run 5 minutes over. Do you have something else?
So next meeting is the October 21.
October 21?
So right now we're slated to talk about the fencing and the campers. If I have anything with definitions that. I have reached out to consultants to see if we can get assistance on the inclusionary. So I'm waiting to see if that's possible. So that might be something that I can kind of
Yep.
staff out to the consultants, working on other things, but I don't know yet. So,
Well,
and if that, and I did ask if they can do that. That would have to be basically done by December 2nd at the latest. So they're trying to figure out if that can be accommodated.
Okay,
Just FYI, next meeting I'll be on Zoom.
you'll be on Zoom. Okay, thank you for letting us know. All right, if I see here no other, no other comments,
I have a question.
sure.
It's a leftover from, the last meeting, when there was a lot of discussion about the SHI requirements.
Yep.
And whether or not it made sense for 1 unit or 2 units to go through all the bureaucracy the state requires. And it seemed from what I was listening to, that the consensus was, no, it doesn't make sense to do for the time and the expense and the bureaucracy for 1 or 2 units. Which I think makes sense to me. Here's my question though. If we don't put these units into the SHI, are there unintended consequences where the state will think we're not a team player or something and knock us out for something else because we're not putting our units into the SHI?
Probably not.
I mean, a town doesn't get penalized by not achieving the 10%, other than we don't get to assert the control over potentially.
40B.
But we don't get penalized like.
Like, you're not doing this, so you're not eligible for this.
Well, I mean, there are yes, potentially there might be certain grants that we might not get as favorably rated on, but again, I would say part of any grant we're talking about is gonna be narrative explaining that we're doing all kinds of other stuff to address numbers. So I mean, I think I don't say it's tough, there's always a chance, but I think it's just like, that's just the policy decision of Is it more important to get SHI points or just get units created that we know exist and we have?
And I also think that with the seasonal communities legislation, that issues like we're having here in Eastham about these small number of units are gonna pop up in other small communities. So maybe down the road, the state would take another look at what they're doing, because it's not the world that many of these regulations and requirements were put in. This is a different world. So anyway, okay.
But what you're pointing out is this coming year, we have to redo the housing production plan. And so when we talk about the actions in the housing production plan, we need to be more discerning about those actions that will create more SHI units and those that will just create more units in general. Because what the state does require in order to improve our housing production plan is that we make progress towards the 10. We have goals and actions that will get us towards the 10%, a certain amount per year. So we just have to be careful about what we say we're doing as actions and whether they will or will not count towards this job, so that we count the right things.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all.
I just want to make a final point. The housing production plan sets milestones, and we've interpreted, because of the lack of rental housing, the lack of affordability, and your milestones, that has sort of guided many of the language in the zoning.
Right.
But the issues of whether some single family houses should end up being 2 condos, and we may not want to put any restrictions, and that's just a different leap from where this committee is. And I would look to not only the planning department's assessments, but I would also encourage you that when you do the housing production plan, maybe one of the things you want to do is have the housing trust adopt a statement of strategy. Like, here's the numbers and the goals, but it would be great to have a policy strategy.
Right.
What is our housing strategy? What are the things we want to prioritize? Because if that's, then adopted by the town, then we've got an objective criteria to say, yes.
Well, and what Paul and I talked about, and Rachel as the housing coordinator, is that the process we'll go through in this next iteration is more about creating a housing strategy for the town,
Okay.
not just the required
Data elements, yeah.
the state plan to achieve the SHI, but marry those two things together into an actual housing strategy. So to address
Yep.
both of your kind of comments. So we've talked about that's the approach.
Okay.
In the last time, we kind of did that because we made it clear that in the housing production plan, we weren't just talking about SHI activities, we were talking about broader activities to meet the overall demand for housing in the town. I think now we're gonna take it to that next level and actually really do a housing strategy.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right,
So-
great.
so stay tuned.
All right, 10 minutes over, and we sort of always run 10 minutes over.
Yeah.
Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Martin, for hanging in on Zoom. This is not a easy committee to zoom into.
No, I know I'm very comfortable doing it via Zoom. So
Okay.
as you could tell, I was not afraid to speak up. So
Oh,
Thank you, Martin.
thank you, everybody.
Thank
I'll see
you.
you guys in 2 weeks.
take care. All right then,
Cheers.
bye-bye.
Bye bye.